On a chilly evening in Los Angeles in 1993, Calvin Broadus Jr., who the world knew better as Snoop Dogg, was driving his black BMW through the streets of Long Beach. He had just finished a late-night recording session at Death Row Records, working on what would become his groundbreaking debut album, Dogga Style. The streets were quiet, and the young rapper was looking forward to getting home after a long day in the studio. As Snoop cruised down the boulevard, he noticed the flashing lights of a police cruiser in his rearview mirror. This wasn't an unusual occurrence for him. Being a young black man in an expensive car often drew police attention in Los Angeles. With a wary sigh, he pulled over to the curb, already reaching for his license and registration. The officer who approached his window was David Mack, a veteran of the LAPD with a reputation for being particularly tough on the local hip-hop community. Mack's demeanor was aggressive from the start, his flashlight beam dancing across Snoop's face as he demanded identification. Despite Snoop's polite compliance, the officer's hostile attitude only intensified. What should have been a routine traffic stop quickly spiraled into something more serious. Officer Mack claimed he smelled marijuana and ordered Snoop out of the vehicle. As Snoop stood by the side of the road, hands on the hood of his car, he watched helplessly as Mack began an aggressive search of his vehicle. The search dragged on for what felt like hours. Other patrol cars arrived, their lights painting the scene in alternating red and blue. A small crowd of onlookers began to gather, recognizing the rising rap star. Some pulled out cameras to document the incident, while others shouted words of support to Snoop. Then came the moment that would change everything. Officer Mack emerged from the car, triumphantly holding up a small bag of what he claimed was cocaine. Snoop's heart sank. He knew with absolute certainty that there had been no drugs in his car. He had been especially careful about this since signing with Death Row Records and beginning his rise to fame. "Look what we have here," Mack announced loudly, making a show of the discovery for the growing crowd of spectators. "Seems like another rapper thinking he's above the law." As Mack read him his rights and placed him in handcuffs, Snoop maintained his composure, even as his mind raced with the implications of what was happening. He had seen this scenario play out before with other artists and friends. Corrupt cops planting evidence to make arrests and build their reputations. The ride to the police station was tense and silent. Snoop observed everything carefully, noting how Mack seemed to take pleasure in his arrest, making comments about cleaning up the streets and taking down these gangster rappers. Something about the officer's behavior struck Snoop as odd. There was an almost theatrical quality to his actions, as if he was performing for an audience that wasn't there. At the station, the booking process was deliberately slow and humiliating. Officers paraded Snoop through the building, making sure everyone got a good look at their high-profile arrest. But through it all, Snoop remained calm, his mind already working on his next steps. He knew he needed to call his lawyer, and he had a feeling this case was going to be bigger than just a simple drug charge. News of Snoop's arrest spread quickly through the hip-hop community. By morning, the story was all over local radio and TV. Death Row Records CEO Suge Knight was already mobilizing the label's legal team, and calls were being made to top criminal defense attorneys in Los Angeles. What Officer Mack didn't realize that night was that his actions would set in motion a chain of events that would expose years of corruption within the LAPD. Snoop's case would become more than just another celebrity arrest. It would become a symbol of the systematic harassment and corruption that plagued the relationship between law enforcement and the hip-hop community. As Snoop sat in his cell that first night, he made a promise to himself. He wouldn't let this injustice stand. He had the resources, the platform, and most importantly, the truth on his side. This wasn't just about clearing his name anymore. It was about exposing a corrupt system that had been targeting his community for years. Little did Officer Mack know that his routine traffic stop would eventually lead to his own downfall and create one of the most dramatic courtroom scenes in Los Angeles legal history. The stage was set for a battle that would become legendary in both legal and hip-hop circles. In the weeks following Snoop Dogg's arrest, his legal team began digging deep into Officer David Mack's history. The initial investigation revealed disturbing patterns that went far beyond a simple case of harassment. David Kenner, Snoop's primary attorney, assembled a team of private investigators who worked around the clock, piecing together a complex puzzle of corruption. The first breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A former LAPD officer, who wished to remain anonymous, reached out to Kenner with startling information. According to this whistleblower, Mack had been involved in numerous suspicious arrests, particularly targeting successful. As the investigation deepened, more victims of Mack's corrupt practices began to come forward. A local music producer shared security camera footage from 6 months earlier, showing Mack planting evidence in another rapper's car. The footage had been too grainy to use in court at the time, but it matched perfectly with the pattern emerging in Snoop's case. The team's most significant discovery came when they found connections between Mack and several notorious street gangs. Bank records showed suspicious deposits into Mack's accounts that coincided with major drug busts he had conducted. Even more disturbing, some of these busts had resulted in the mysterious disappearance of large amounts of seized drugs and money from evidence lockup. Death Row Records' security team, led by former police officers themselves, began conducting their own parallel investigation. They discovered that Mack had been spotted multiple times meeting with known gang members in areas far from his assigned patrol route. Photos and video evidence started piling up, showing Mack in compromising situations with known criminals. One evening, while reviewing hours of surveillance footage, Kenner's team made a shocking discovery. They found video evidence of Mack meeting with members of a rival record label just days before Snoop's arrest. The footage showed money changing hands and what appeared to be a detailed discussion, complete with maps and timestamps. It was becoming clear that Snoop's arrest wasn't random. It was a calculated hit, possibly ordered by music industry rivals. The investigation also uncovered a string of similar cases where Mack had targeted other artists. Many had chosen to plead guilty to lesser charges rather than fight the system, fearing longer sentences if they went to trial. These cases formed a clear pattern of abuse of power and selective targeting of successful black entertainers. Local community activists, who had been collecting complaints about police misconduct for years, provided additional evidence. They had documented dozens of similar incidents involving Officer Mack, but most victims had been too afraid or lacked the resources to fight back. Snoop's case was quickly becoming a rallying point for those who had suffered similar injustices. The most damning evidence came from Mack's own precinct. A young officer, troubled by what he had witnessed, secretly provided internal documents showing that Mack had been under internal investigation multiple times. These investigations had mysteriously disappeared or been dropped without explanation, suggesting corruption at higher levels within the department. As the evidence mounted, the legal team discovered something even more sinister. Mack's bank records showed regular deposits from a company that was later linked to a major Los Angeles bank robbery. The amounts were too large to be explained by his police salary, and the timing of these deposits aligned perfectly with several major unsolved crimes in the area. The impact of these discoveries sent shockwaves through the Los Angeles legal community. Other defense attorneys began reviewing cases where Mack had been the arresting officer, leading to the discovery of dozens more potentially false arrests. The district attorney's office, initially resistant to acknowledging any wrongdoing, was forced to take notice as the evidence became impossible to ignore. Snoop, still dealing with the stress of his pending case, found renewed hope as each new piece of evidence emerged. He spent hours with his legal team, helping them connect dots and remember details from the night of his arrest that suddenly made more sense in light of the new information. The media, initially focused on portraying Snoop as just another rapper in trouble with the law, began to shift their narrative. Investigative journalists started their own investigations into Officer Mack and the broader implications of police corruption in Los Angeles. As the second phase of this legal battle drew to a close, it was clear that what had started as a simple drug possession case had evolved into something much bigger. The stage was set for a courtroom showdown that would expose not just one corrupt officer, but potentially an entire system of corruption within the LAPD. The preparation for Snoop Dogg's defense became one of the most intensive legal efforts in Los Angeles criminal history. David Kenner and his team set up a war room in a downtown office building, its walls covered with timelines, photographs, and connection charts that mapped out Officer Mack's criminal activities. The legal team worked tirelessly, often pulling all-nighters as they built what they hoped would be an airtight case. Johnny Cochran, already famous for handling high-profile cases, joined the defense team as lead counsel. His presence brought immediate media attention and added credibility to Snoop's claims of innocence. Cochran's first move was to shift the narrative from a simple drug possession case to a broader expose of systemic police corruption. One key witness was Marcus Thompson, a local business owner who had experienced a similar setup by Mack 2 years earlier. Thompson had lost his business fighting the charges but had maintained detailed records of his encounter. His testimony would be crucial in establishing Mack's pattern of behavior. The defense team also focused on building Snoop's character profile. They gathered testimonials from community leaders, music industry professionals, and even former teachers who could speak to his character. They documented his involvement in youth programs and his efforts to create jobs in his community through his music career. Behind the scenes, private investigators continued to dig deeper into Mack's finances. They discovered offshore accounts with suspicious deposits and connections to known criminal enterprises. The evidence suggested that Mack wasn't just a corrupt cop. He was part of a larger criminal network that had infiltrated the LAPD. Snoop remained actively involved in his defense, spending hours reviewing evidence and providing insights. Despite pressure from some quarters to accept a plea deal, he remained adamant about fighting the charges. His record label, Death Row Records, fully supported his decision, providing additional resources for the legal battle. The defense team faced numerous obstacles. Police officers closed ranks around Mack, making it difficult to obtain internal documents. However, a breakthrough came when a police clerk, troubled by what she had witnessed over the years, secretly provided access to crucial records. These documents showed numerous complaints against Mack that had been buried or dismissed without proper investigation. Media management became another crucial aspect of the defense strategy. Cochran organized carefully timed press conferences, releasing evidence piece by piece to maintain public interest and pressure on the prosecution. The team also worked with documentary filmmakers who began recording the behind-the-scenes preparation, sensing that this case would have historic significance. The pressure began to affect Officer Mack. Surveillance teams noticed him making late-night visits to known criminal hangouts. His behavior became increasingly erratic, and he made several mistakes that provided the defense with even more ammunition. He was spotted attempting to intimidate potential witnesses, which only strengthened the defense's case. One of the most powerful elements of the defense strategy came from an unexpected source. A forensic accountant discovered that the drugs allegedly found in Snoop's car had never been properly logged into evidence. Further investigation revealed that the same batch of drugs had mysteriously appeared in multiple arrests made by Mack, suggesting he was recycling planted evidence. The defense team also focused on the broader impact of police corruption on the hip-hop community. They gathered statistics showing a pattern of targeted harassment against successful African-American artists. This evidence would help transform Snoop's case from a personal battle to a fight for social justice. As the trial date approached, the team conducted multiple mock trials to prepare. They carefully selected a diverse group of mock jurors who provided valuable feedback on how different pieces of evidence might be perceived. This preparation helped them refine their presentation and anticipate the prosecution's strategies. The final piece of the defense strategy fell into place when they secured an expert witness, a former internal affairs investigator who had previously attempted to investigate Mack but had been shut down by superior officers. His testimony would provide crucial insight into the department's failure to address corruption within its ranks. By the time the trial was set to begin, the defense had assembled over 5,000 pages of evidence, lined up 47 witnesses, and prepared a compelling narrative that would not only exonerate Snoop, but also expose deep-rooted corruption in law enforcement. The stage was set for what would become one of the most memorable trials in Los Angeles history. As Snoop's legal team prepared for trial, explosive new revelations about Officer David Mack's past began surfacing at an alarming rate. The first bombshell dropped when a former bank employee came forward with information linking Mack to a $722,000 bank robbery at Bank of America in Los Angeles. Security footage from the robbery showed striking similarities between the robber's movements and Mack's distinctive walking style. The investigation revealed that Mack had been living far beyond his means as a police officer. He owned multiple properties, drove luxury vehicles, and frequently gambled large sums at Las Vegas casinos. His lifestyle raised serious questions about his income sources, considering his modest police salary couldn't possibly support such extravagance. Thompson revealed that Mack had developed a sophisticated system of targeting successful African-American entertainers and businessmen. He would study their routines, waiting for the perfect opportunity to make a traffic stop. The planted evidence was always carefully prepared in advance, and the arrests were timed to cause maximum damage to the victims' careers and reputations. The investigation also uncovered Mac's connections to Death Row Records rivals. Bank records showed payments from competing record labels being funneled through offshore accounts into Mac's possession. These financial trails suggested that some of Mac's targeted arrests were actually hired hits designed to disrupt the success of Death Row Records artists. Perhaps the most shocking discovery came from Mac's personal storage unit. Acting on an anonymous tip, investigators found a cache of stolen evidence, including drugs and money that had disappeared from various crime scenes. The storage unit also contained detailed notebooks documenting his criminal activities, including lists of potential targets and amounts received for various jobs. Former victims of Mac's corruption began coming forward in greater numbers. A local nightclub owner revealed how Mac had extorted protection money from him for years, threatening to plant evidence and shut down his business if he didn't pay. Similar stories emerged from other business owners in the community, establishing a clear pattern of systematic extortion. The investigation also revealed Mac's connections to the infamous Rampart scandal that would later rock the LAPD. He had been part of an elite unit of officers who operated with virtual impunity, engaging in various criminal activities while using their badges as protection. This connection added another layer of complexity to the case, suggesting that Mac's corruption was part of a larger institutional problem. As pressure mounted, cracks began to appear in Mac's facade. His behavior became increasingly erratic. He was spotted having heated arguments with known criminal associates in public places. Surveillance teams observed him making late-night visits to locations associated with gang activity, seemingly desperate to cover his tracks or secure protection. The turning point came when one of Mac's closest criminal associates, facing his own legal troubles, decided to cooperate with investigators. This associate provided detailed information about Mac's involvement in multiple bank robberies, drug trafficking operations, and evidence-planting schemes. He also revealed the existence of video recordings that showed Mac planning various criminal activities. Internal affairs files, which had been previously sealed, were finally opened as part of the investigation. These files revealed numerous complaints against Mac that had been systematically buried or dismissed. The complaints painted a picture of an officer who had been operating outside the law for years, protected by a system that was either unwilling or unable to stop him. The evidence also suggested that Mac had developed connections within the judicial system. Several cases against him had been mysteriously dismissed or had evidence disappear just before trial. These connections raised serious questions about the extent of corruption within the Los Angeles criminal justice system. As the full scope of Mac's crimes became clear, many of his former supporters within the department began distancing themselves. Officers who had once defended him now admitted to having suspicions about his activities, but claimed they had been afraid to speak up. The investigation had transformed from a simple drug case into an exposure of deep-rooted corruption that threatened to shake the entire Los Angeles law enforcement community to its core. As Snoop's trial approached, it became clear that the case would be about much more than one rapper's innocence. It would be about bringing to light years of systematic abuse and corruption within the LAPD. The Los Angeles County Courthouse buzzed with unprecedented activity on the first day of the trial. Television crews lined the steps, and crowds gathered early in the morning, hoping to get a glimpse of Snoop Dogg or Officer Mac. Inside, the courtroom was packed with spectators, journalists, and legal observers, all sensing they were about to witness a historic case. Johnny Cochran's opening statement sent shockwaves through the courtroom. He didn't just focus on Snoop's innocence. He painted a vivid picture of a corrupt police officer who had terrorized the community for years. Cochran's words resonated through the silent courtroom as he promised to expose not just one incident of corruption, but an entire system of abuse. One of the most dramatic moments came when Marcus Thompson took the stand. His testimony about his own experience with Officer Mac brought several jurors to tears. Thompson described how Mac's false arrest had cost him his business, his home, and nearly his family. As he spoke, Mac shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding eye contact with everyone in the courtroom. The forensic evidence presented by the defense team was devastating. Expert witnesses demonstrated how the fingerprints on the bag of drugs allegedly found in Snoop's car couldn't match his prints, but instead matched those of Officer Mac. Security camera footage from nearby businesses showed Mac approaching Snoop's car with something already in his hand before the search began. Former Officer James Thompson's testimony proved to be a turning point in the trial. He detailed how Mac had bragged about setting up various musicians and entertainers, describing it as cleaning up the streets while pocketing money from rival music industry figures. The courtroom fell silent as Thompson described specific instances of evidence planting and extortion he had witnessed. The financial evidence presented was equally damning. Forensic accountants traced millions of dollars flowing through Mac's hidden accounts, far more than his police salary could explain. They connected these deposits to specific arrests he had made, showing a clear pattern of profiting from his badge. Throughout the trial, Snoop maintained a dignified presence in the courtroom. He dressed conservatively in suits, took notes during testimony, and consulted quietly with his legal team. His demeanor challenged the stereotypical image many had of rap artists, and several jurors were later heard commenting on his professional behavior. A surprising moment came when a high-ranking LAPD official testified about previous internal investigations into Mac that had been suspiciously shut down. The official, clearly uncomfortable, admitted under oath that there had been pressure from above to protect certain officers, including Mac, despite mounting evidence of misconduct. The prosecution's case suffered another blow when their star witness, another police officer who was supposed to corroborate Mac's version of events, broke down under cross-examination. After intense questioning by Cochran, the officer admitted that he had been pressured to stick to a fabricated story and couldn't do it anymore. Video evidence from multiple sources was particularly compelling. Security footage from different arrests showed Mac following the same pattern: a questionable traffic stop, a suspicious search, and the miraculous discovery of drugs. The similarity in his methods was impossible to ignore. The courtroom atmosphere grew increasingly tense as more evidence of corruption emerged. Several jurors were seen taking detailed notes, particularly during testimony about the broader impact of police corruption on the community. Even the judge, known for his stoic demeanor, appeared visibly troubled by the mounting evidence. Local community members filled the public gallery each day, many wearing "Justice for Snoop" buttons. Their presence served as a constant reminder that this case represented more than just one celebrity's fight against false charges. It symbolized a community's struggle against systemic abuse. As the prosecution's case continued to unravel, Mac's behavior in the courtroom became increasingly erratic. He was seen arguing with his attorneys during breaks, and his responses during cross-examination became defensive and contradictory. His demeanor only served to reinforce the defense's portrayal of him as a corrupt officer who had finally been caught. The trial's first phase was drawing to a close, but it had already accomplished something significant. It had exposed deep-rooted corruption within law enforcement and given voice to countless victims who had previously been silenced. The stage was set for what would become one of the most memorable testimonies in the history of Los Angeles criminal justice. The sixth week of the trial brought the moment everyone had been waiting for. Officer David Mack would take the stand. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as he walked to the witness box, his once confident stride now reduced to a nervous shuffle. The prosecution hoped his testimony would salvage their crumbling case, but what followed would change everything. Initially, Mack maintained his composure, reciting his version of Snoop's arrest with practiced precision. He described what he claimed was a routine traffic stop that led to a legitimate drug discovery. Cochran began methodically, almost conversationally, asking simple questions about Mac's police career. Then, without warning, he presented surveillance photos showing Mac meeting with known criminals weeks before Snoop's arrest. The officer's face visibly paled, and his hands began to shake as he tried to explain away the damning evidence. The breaking point came when Cochran produced bank statements showing massive deposits to Mac's offshore accounts that coincided with Snoop's arrest. When questioned about the source of these funds, Mac's carefully constructed story began to unravel. He contradicted himself multiple times, growing increasingly agitated with each inconsistency Cochran exposed. A dramatic moment occurred when Cochran played enhanced audio from Mac's police radio on the night of the arrest. The recording captured him speaking to an unknown person about making sure the package is ready before pulling Snoop over. When confronted with this evidence, Mac's composure completely broke. "You don't understand," he suddenly burst out, his voice echoing through the stunned courtroom. These rappers think they can come into our city and do whatever they want. Someone had to stop them. The outburst sent shockwaves through the courtroom, and the judge had to call for order. As Cochran pressed further, Mack's testimony became increasingly erratic. He began revealing details about other corrupt activities without even being asked, as if a dam had broken. He spoke about pressure from higher-ups, payoffs from rival record labels, and a systemic pattern of targeting successful African-American entertainers. The prosecutor's attempts to redirect the testimony only made things worse. Each question seemed to lead Mack into revealing more incriminating information. He appeared to have lost all control, alternating between angry outbursts and moments of defeated silence. During one particularly intense exchange, Mack accidentally revealed his connection to the infamous bank robbery. When Cochran presented evidence linking him to the crime, instead of denying it, Mack muttered, "That money was supposed to be untraceable." The slip caused audible gasps in the courtroom. The judge had to call several recesses as Mack's behavior became more unstable. During one break, he was overheard threatening his own lawyer, claiming he had been promised this would never go to trial. Court security had to be increased as tensions in the room escalated. Snoop sat calmly through it all, occasionally taking notes and whispering to his legal team. His dignified presence contrasted sharply with Mack's deteriorating demeanor, a fact not lost on the jury. Several jurors were seen shaking their heads in disbelief as more corruption came to light. The final blow came when Cochran presented evidence of Mack's involvement in framing other artists. Security footage showed him planting evidence in multiple cases, using the same drugs that had been logged into evidence repeatedly. When confronted with this proof, Mack finally broke down completely. "The whole system is corrupt," he shouted, rising from the witness stand. "I was just playing my part. There are others, bigger than me, who ordered these hits. I was following orders." The judge immediately ordered the jury to leave the courtroom as Mack continued his meltdown. The day ended with Mack being led from the courtroom by security, his career and reputation in shambles. His outbursts had not only destroyed the prosecution's case, but had also opened the door for investigations into higher-ranking officers and officials. As news of Mack's breakdown spread, more victims of his corruption began contacting Snoop's legal team. The case had transformed from a simple drug possession charge into an exposé of systemic police corruption that would have far-reaching consequences for the LAPD. The prosecution team was seen huddled in intense discussion, clearly recognizing that their case had been irreparably damaged. The judge scheduled an emergency meeting with both legal teams, sensing that this trial had become about much more than one rapper's innocence. The day's events had not only vindicated Snoop, but had also cracked open a decades-long pattern of corruption that would lead to major reforms in the Los Angeles criminal justice system. The stage was now set for the trial's emotional climax. After Mack's explosive breakdown, all eyes turned to Snoop Dogg as he prepared to take the stand. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, with people standing along the walls. Unlike his usual public appearances, Snoop wore a conservative dark suit and carried himself with quiet dignity as he walked to the witness stand. The moment he raised his right hand to take the oath, a profound silence fell over the courtroom. His testimony began with Johnny Cochran gently guiding him through the events of that fateful night. Snoop's voice, normally known for its laid-back drawl, was clear and measured as he recounted how a routine drive home had turned into a nightmare. "I was just trying to make something of myself," Snoop testified, his voice carrying emotion but remaining steady. "I come from nothing, and through music, I found a way to not just help myself, but to give back to my community." He described how his success had made him a target, not just for Officer Mack, but for a system that seemed designed to tear down young black men who achieved success. As he spoke about the impact of the arrest on his family and career, several jurors were visibly moved. He described how his mother had cried when she heard about his arrest, believing all his hard work to build a legitimate career was about to be destroyed. The raw honesty in his voice touched everyone in the courtroom. The most powerful moment came when Snoop described his work with youth programs in Long Beach. He explained how he had been using his success to create opportunities for young people, trying to show them alternatives to street life. "Every time an officer like Mack frames someone innocent," he testified, "it doesn't just hurt that person, it tells all these kids that the system will never give them a fair chance." The prosecutor's cross-examination attempted to paint Snoop as just another gangster rapper, but this strategy backfired spectacularly. Snoop calmly explained how his music reflected the realities of his community, while his actions showed his commitment to positive change. He spoke about employing local residents at his studio and funding community programs. When questioned about his past encounters with law enforcement, Snoop didn't shy away or become defensive. Instead, he used these questions to highlight the systematic harassment he and others had faced. He described multiple incidents where he had been pulled over for no reason, always managing to stay calm despite the provocations. The judge, known for maintaining strict control over his courtroom, was seen wiping his eyes during Snoop's description of how police corruption had affected his neighborhood. Even seasoned court reporters found themselves moved by his authentic and heartfelt testimony. Snoop shared a particularly emotional story about a young artist he had been mentoring who had also been framed by Mac. The young man had given up on his music career after the arrest, believing the system was too stacked against him. As Snoop spoke, his voice cracked slightly, and the young man, sitting in the gallery, openly wept. The testimony took an unexpected turn when Snoop addressed Officer Mac directly. Instead of showing anger, he expressed pity for a man who had betrayed his badge and his community. "I don't hate you," Snoop said, looking straight at Mac. "I feel sorry for you because you had the power to protect and serve, but you chose to destroy and deceive." Throughout his testimony, Snoop maintained his composure while showing genuine emotion. He spoke about his hopes for reform in the police department and his vision for better relationships between law enforcement and the community. His words carried the weight of someone who had experienced both success and persecution. As his testimony drew to a close, Snoop shared his dreams for the future of his community. He talked about creating recording studios in community centers, funding educational programs, and working to bridge the gap between police and residents. His vision of hope and healing brought tears to many eyes in the courtroom. The impact of Snoop's testimony was immediate and profound. The jury seemed deeply moved, and even some of the most skeptical observers were seen nodding in agreement. His words had transformed the trial from a simple criminal case into a powerful statement about justice, redemption, and the possibility of positive change. When he finally stepped down from the witness stand, the courtroom remained silent for several moments, absorbing the weight of what they had heard. It was clear to everyone present that they had witnessed not just testimony, but a powerful moment of truth that would have lasting implications for the entire justice system. The final day of the trial arrived with an electric atmosphere in the courthouse. News vans lined the streets, and crowds gathered early in the morning, sensing they were about to witness a historic moment in Los Angeles legal history. Inside the packed courtroom, Snoop Dogg sat calmly with his legal team, while Officer Mack appeared visibly nervous at the defense table. Judge William Hamilton began the proceedings by addressing the numerous motions filed after Mack's breakdown on the stand. The prosecution, recognizing the overwhelming evidence of corruption, had made a last-minute attempt to dismiss the case, but the judge insisted it should reach its natural conclusion. The judge's final instructions to the jury were unusually lengthy, taking nearly an hour as he detailed the multiple. The jury had deliberated for just 4 hours, remarkably short for such a complex case. As the foreman stood to deliver the verdict, the courtroom fell into complete silence. One by one, the charges against Snoop were read, and one by one, the word "not guilty" echoed through the chamber. But Judge Hamilton wasn't finished. In an unprecedented move, he ordered an immediate arrest warrant for Officer Mack based on the evidence revealed during the trial. The judge's voice shook with emotion as he delivered a powerful statement about justice and accountability. "What we have witnessed in this courtroom goes beyond the simple case of evidence planting," the judge declared. "We have seen the exposure of a cancer within our justice system, a cancer that has destroyed lives, shattered trust, and betrayed the very principles we are sworn to uphold." The judge's words became even more powerful as he addressed Officer Mack directly. "You wore a badge that represented hope and protection for our community. Instead, you used it as a weapon against the very people you were sworn to protect. Your actions have not only violated the law but have damaged the sacred trust between law enforcement and the citizens they serve." As court officers moved to take Mack into custody, the judge announced the formation of a special task force to investigate all cases involving the disgraced officer. He ordered an immediate review of every arrest Mack had made during his career, promising justice for anyone wrongly convicted. Snoop's response to the verdict was characteristically dignified. Instead of celebrating, he used the moment to announce the creation of a legal defense fund for victims of police corruption. Standing on the courthouse steps, he pledged substantial personal resources to help others who had been wrongly accused but lacked the means to fight back. The impact of the case was immediate and far-reaching. Within days, the Los Angeles Police Department announced major reforms in its internal affairs procedures. The police chief publicly apologized to Snoop and all others who had been victimized by corrupt officers, promising sweeping changes in training and oversight. The case also sparked a national conversation about police accountability. Major news networks covered the story extensively, using it as a launching point for broader discussions about systemic racism and corruption in law enforcement. Legal experts cited the case as a turning point in how the justice system handles police misconduct. Perhaps the most touching moment came when former victims of Mac's corruption gathered at a community center where Snoop spoke about healing and reconciliation. Many shared their stories publicly for the first time, finding strength in the victory that had been achieved. The event ended with Snoop performing an impromptu concert, his lyrics now carrying new weight and meaning. The aftermath of the trial brought significant changes to the Los Angeles criminal justice system. New oversight committees were established, body camera requirements were strengthened, and procedures for handling evidence were completely overhauled. The case became required study material at police academies across the country. Officer Mack ultimately faced multiple federal charges, including civil rights violations, evidence tampering, and conspiracy. His case led investigators to several other corrupt officers and officials, resulting in a cleanup of the department that would continue for years. As for Snoop, he emerged from the trial not just vindicated but transformed in the public eye. He became a respected voice for criminal justice reform, regularly speaking at law schools and police academies about the importance of integrity in law enforcement. The case ended, but its impact continues to resonate. It stands as a powerful reminder that justice, though sometimes delayed, can prevail when brave individuals stand up against corruption. As Snoop often says in his public speeches about the case, sometimes the truth needs a beat to be heard, but once it starts playing, nobody can stop its rhythm.